Army leaders are, generally speaking, uninformed, and their intuitions are more often incorrect than they are correct. We're supposed to be leading in highly complex organizations in an environment that's data-driven, like you say, but instead I think we often rely on gut instinct and anecdotal experience. That's not leadership. That's just rolling the dice and hoping for the best.
Hello, fellow leaders, and welcome to the Military Leader Podcast. I am Drew Stedman. I've studied leadership for 3 decades. I've put those lessons into practice as a U.S. Army officer, and I am passionate about growing leaders from every profession. In this podcast, you'll find episodes with today's most successful leaders. My goal is simple: to deliver insight, to help you become a better leader, and then to develop the leaders around you. You can find this episode and tons of other leadership writing and resources at themilitaryleader.com. Today's conversation is a bit different. I recorded it on the road, but I also have 3 guests here, and we're going to talk about using data to become a better leader and improve your organizations. Now look, 20 years ago, you could get away with saying you're just not a computer person. I remember leaders, even senior commanders, who took pride in resisting the digital movement in the military and then avoided any attempt to learn about it or leverage it. Today, the military's most prolific weapon system is Microsoft Office. We touch it more than any other system, and yet we have little to no instruction on how to maximize it. Even a few years ago, powerful data tools were exquisite, expensive, and unavailable for leaders at the tactical level. That's no longer the case. Leaders at every level have access to programs and apps that can unlock unthinkable insight. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say unthinkable. There is new awareness and new insight, potentially life-saving insight, that lies just on the other side of data. We're going to talk about that in this episode and how you can leverage data tools to augment your leadership and your decision-making. And here are just a few of the questions that you could be answering if you brought some data tools into your unit. How efficient are we at processing evaluations, awards, legal packets, and so on? What maintenance actions should we be focusing on to reach the highest readiness rating? What is our budget spend rate, and are we on track? As our vehicle crews train for gunnery, which training step is the most important and the best predictor for crew qualification? How many suicide ideations, DUIs, and drug offenses is normal for our unit? How much time do our leaders spend reacting to serious incidents and infractions like these? And here's one that I guarantee your higher headquarters cares about. How many sexual harassment and sexual assault offenders were we supposed to begin separation action on, but haven't? All of these questions have been answered by units who pay attention to data and use the tools that are readily available. And the 3 guests today are pioneers of homegrown data innovation in military units. Lieutenant Colonel John Bate commands 223 Infantry and uses his Stanford PhD experience to improve the unit systems and the lethality of his battalion at Fort Carson, Colorado. Lieutenant Colonel Erik Davis brings 16 years of special operations experience and is an Army War College Fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. He is also the author of the Downrange Data Substack, where he shares his experiences using data to outmaneuver challenges in the field. And Major Brett Reichert is an infantry officer and current PhD candidate at Cornell, where he is studying how technology and automation are reshaping warfare. As the brigade executive officer, Brett revolutionized our brigade's systems and processes and managed to plan and execute the brigade's 3-week field exercise without using a single PowerPoint slide. Before I get to the conversation, I want to point you to some resources and recommend a few action steps to bring data into your unit and into your leading. First, check out the article by John Bate and Nate Platts in Army Magazine. It's called Harnessing the Power of Data. Second, head over to Substack and check out Downrange Data by Erik Davis. And then finally, head over to Military Review Online and check out the article by Frank Chernikovsky and others called Attaining Readiness by Developing a Data-Centric Culture, which goes over the data revolution that's going on in the 4th Infantry Division right now. So, after you listen to this episode, you're curious about data, you've read the articles, you're ready to make a change. What can you do? Well, first, Make sure the leaders in your organization are plugged into systems of record, like Army Vantage, that can show what reality looks like in your formation. Second, inventory your unit's most challenging problems and determine what data points would help you understand and solve those problems. Third, optimize Microsoft Office. Learn to use Excel and leverage it to understand the problems you care about. Reduce your reliance on PowerPoint for displaying data, and then submit a request for your unit to use Microsoft Power BI. And we're going to talk about how to use all these tools in the episode. And then finally, put some effort into learning these tools. There isn't a single data analysis action in Excel that you can't find a tutorial about. I mean, I did it twice yesterday. Google, YouTube, and AI can all teach you how. Think about it this way. If you heard of a way to make your rifle rounds fly around corners, you'd research it immediately. Data is no different. There are insights and advantages that you can't even imagine until you open up your eyes to what data can do. Listen, the days of avoiding computers and relying on gut instinct are over. You have the chance to be more aware of what's happening in your unit, within your organization, and in your environment. We owe it to our people and our service to do so, especially as our adversaries and competitors fight for every advantage over us. Okay, let's get to the episode. Thanks so much for listening, and here's my conversation on data literacy with John Bate, Erik Davis, and Brett Reichert. Gentlemen, it is great to see you. Thank you for taking the time to connect with me and then share your insights and experiences with the military audience. Let's dive in. We have Erik Davis, John Bate, and Brett Reichert to talk about data. And I want to kick it off with you, Brett. The Army is, as you know, it's grounded in experience, right? And you've got training events and soldier interactions and deployments. And over the years, they build this intuitive sense that leaders come to rely on heavily. Clausewitz called it the kudoi, right? It's the commander's ability to make quick and accurate decisions in battle. It's a type of intuition that allows a leader to recognize the truth in a situation that would normally require long study and reflection. And then, I think this phrase sums it up nicely also, is that Clausewitz believed the kudoi was a gift of brilliant commanders that allowed them to see what others could not. Now, in the world of limitless information that we have, you would think that leaders' intuition today is more informed and stronger than ever. We see more, we understand more, and we make better decisions than we have ever before. Do you think that's true?
Let me start off by ruffling some feathers here. My take on this personally is that Army leaders are, generally speaking, uninformed, and their intuitions are more often incorrect than they are correct. I think, we're supposed to be leading in highly complex organizations in an environment that's data-driven, like you say. But instead, I think we often rely on gut instinct and anecdotal experience. And let me be clear, that's not leadership. That's just rolling the dice and hoping for the best. And I think this gut instinct, people mask in what they call the art of command, but it's incomplete. And I think we ignore the wealth of data that surrounds us. I think our intuition without data is guesswork. And in the military, guesswork is a recipe for failure, in my opinion. I think we pride ourselves on training and adapting and overcoming, yet when it comes to using data, we seem stuck in the year 2003 or in the 90s still. Our decision-making cycles are limited by the failure to integrate our data. I think we imagine if instead of making reactive decisions with incomplete information, we use data proactively to predict some of these outcomes. We could optimize logistics. We understand morale better. We can talk about the powers of lessons learned in a different way because data provides the real story, the trends that we can't see very easily, and the things that we can't intuit with our own minds. It exposes gaps in assumptions and the truth about what's actually happening around us. And I think that the truth is relying solely on gut feelings is a disservice to our soldiers. And I think that if we want to become better leaders and we want to achieve the missions in a different way, we have to truly become informed leaders, and we have to stop relying on this gut instinct and intuition solely. Now, that said, those two things are very important, and those two things Army leaders will continue to gain over the experience of their careers. And I don't want to minimize what those things mean, but it can't be the whole of it. We can't run a million person organization and and conduct worldwide operations based on our gut instinct.
Appreciate you giving that perspective. We've got senior NCOs and colonels and generals who have built this career-long base of knowledge and experience that they rely on every single day. And you and I have been in the room when leaders have said, "Well, I don't need to know all of the details in the data. I can scan the inbox and I can walk around my formation and understand what's going on." I mean, how do we balance what you're saying with this feeling that they really know their formations, and we've done it their whole career, so why would I need to change?
That intuition is generally wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. You can be a really, really good leader and walk around your formations, and you can intuit certain things. You can understand feelings and emotions and what humans are doing. But that's only a fraction of the data that's around you. The complexity of some of the things that this massive, complex organization is doing, you just don't have the human capacity. You're not smart enough. I'm not smart enough to take in all of the sorts of data points that are flying around us and make sense of it without a little bit of help. And so it's important that a leader gets a feeling for their organization and wants to lead in a very human way. But I think that human intuition is probably going to be more optimized if you have underlying sensory data that's helping you to understand the formation. And it's not just like, I don't think it's difficult to do. There are really, really, really smart people all around us, and there's all sorts of data sets already built around us that systems of record have. Sometimes they're inaccurate, sometimes they are. To build a data set it could take 15 minutes depending on what you're attempting to do. And I know that John and Eric are going to talk through some of these things, but it's not as complex as I think people make it out to be.
So, John, so talk to us about the initiatives that you've taken on here since you've come into command, and then how that has changed the way you lead and then your decision making.
Sure, thank you. And I'll start off by agreeing with what Brett said about data making the unseen things seen. So we live in a sea of data, and imagine if there were things you could pull from that could enable better decisions. Now, I can't imagine a commander turning down a UAS feed. If there's something you could know, if you could see what's on the objective, that just allows you to make a better decision. And that's what data allows us to do for you. Just think of it as another form of reconnaissance, a way of getting some intel. And we've been lucky to have some pretty good success here at Fort Carson and 4th Infantry Division by standing up a grassroots data analytics team in the brigade. And what it's giving us is actionable insights from data that allows us to make better decisions. For example, we analyzed our gunnery scores, our striker gunnery scores. And to my great surprise, of all the tables that we fire in gunneries, table 3, which is the Miles laser table, was the one that was the most predictive of a crew's final performance on their table 6 qualification table. The great thing about that's the table where we don't fire live ammunition. And it's pretty early in the process, so we can send a crew back to retraining. And what the data allows us to do is template a threshold. So in this case, it's about an 850 out of 1,000. If a crew score is lower than that, we send them back to the earlier tables to retrain. So data in this case is telling us something we didn't know about the relationships between prior gunnery table scores and the final qualification that allows us to make decisions and build more lethality, save time and resource. So this was a spreadsheet that we already had from our gunnery scores. All we did was take a couple very smart platoon leaders, ran it through some data modeling, which we don't have to get into here, and they found these relationships that allowed us to make better decisions. And and this is just one example of how data can help us out. Across the brigade, we're looking at harmful behaviors, how to predict or how to forecast and then reduce them, how to improve our gunnery scores, how to diagnose and assess our unit culture, how to forecast our maintenance. There's a wealth of opportunities that data can help enable, but augment our gut instinct and inform better decisions.
I want to let Erik share your thoughts here. So, intuition, data, you've written in your Substack about commanders and whether or not they get data and their approach to data. So, why don't you share some of your thoughts about this topic?
Just very quickly, Brett and John hit it right there. Like the data is actually, a lot of this is there. We're just oblivious to it because we're data illiterate formations and we don't know how to look at it or how to amalgamate it. There's nothing worse than being in a position on a line of troops and you think you've got the whole picture because you know what your little slice of the world is. But once you start connecting the entire intel picture, that's how you actually do our jobs. That's not new. That's as old as Clausewitz. We have a tendency to think that our gut instinct is the thing that's going to save us on the battlefield. And you need it. You need that instinct. But the only way you develop a gut instinct is by getting a lot of reps and sets. And most of us don't get that many reps and sets. In the Army, generally, you get a job for a year, 2 years tops, and then you're getting into another job, and then you're moving all the time. And so it's difficult because the conditions are constantly changing for you to develop that real experienced gut. And sometimes you do. I mean, I was able to get 3 different counterinsurgency deployments, Iraq and Afghanistan. I got a pretty good gut for that. And well, then January 2020, I'm a chief operations in Iraq. Ballistic missiles are coming into Baghdad. My gut instinct does not help me in that situation, and it didn't help anybody else. I watched a bunch of leaders around me grab their helmets and their body armor and their rifle, and they ran to the roof when ballistic missiles were coming in, because that was what the gut instinct of 20 years of Iraq and Afghanistan with our Afghan habits. And hey, this is large scale combat operations type of thing. I'm a Asia guy. I started in Korea. I've done a lot of work with First Group, so all my O plans start with ballistic missiles, and none of my gut instinct was going to help me in that situation. So there's a lot of humility that I think a leader needs to take, and data is a great place to help you fill in those gaps. It's not a cure-all, but it's going to help fill in those when you don't have those reps and sets. But you have to be a data literate commander. You can't rely on your formation to always be the ones to do this. This is a commander, because as a commander, then you're going to know what the data is actually telling you versus what it's not. And you're going to know what your gaps in your data are and how to collect better data and how to fill in the information you don't have. That's going to require that data literacy.
So what's the commander's role with data?
First off, we've all been in a formation where we had a commander who loved to run. So guess what? Hulk formation, they go running all the time. Nobody likes it, but that's okay. We're going to go run. Why? Because the commander likes to run. I'm not a runner, so I hate running. I avoid it like the plague. I can show you some data on other things you can do that will have the same effect. But anyways, what we're getting to is the commander sets the formation's culture in a lot of ways. And starting off with, hey, I'm a commander. I don't want to see a PowerPoint slide. I want to see data. I want to be able to look at the actual information and make informed decisions. That not only improves your decision making, but it also improves the decision making of the people around you, and they start valuing it. You start having subordinate organizations that start seeing, hey, I've got a chunk of data. Can I link that in with another sister unit? And then next thing you know, we're having bigger pictures, and we're actually getting to fill in a lot of gaps instead of I'm a lone commander all by myself and I don't understand what's going on.
So let's talk about those tools, Eric, and if you could just expound a little bit on what data and software tools are out there, what's available that units can use so that they can incorporate data better into their their understanding, their visualization, their decision making.
There's really some high end stuff out there, and John and Brett's units have genuinely impressed me with the work that they've gotten done. But if you're in your unit and you don't have a ton of data literacy, start with the easy stuff. Like the smallest thing you can do is use PowerPoint less, preferably not at all, but definitely less. If you're moving data onto a PowerPoint slide, stop. Work with Excel is a very good place. You mentioned shortcuts. There's tons of great shortcuts in Excel. And yes, learn those shortcuts. Everything's going to move faster. But if you leave it in a data form, now you're no longer taking the time to make a PowerPoint slide. Everybody's going to take that time and do something productive with it. I've heard a lot of people say Excel is not a database. Well, when your unit runs on PowerPoint, Excel is practically witchcraft. Like it's an amazing level that's going to level up your organization. Start with Excel and start using it. The other great thing about Excel is a lot of our databases we talked about earlier, we've got a lot of this information, but a lot of it doesn't talk to each other because we wrote really poor requirements when we contracted out software. And so DTMS doesn't talk to IPSA, doesn't talk to. Excel is how you're going to move that data around. And so being good with Excel is a great starting point. Once you've got Excel, now you're moving up to SharePoint tables and then Power BI. And the really great thing about those tools, and as you go on, you're going to go into Python. We're not going to go too far down the road. You're doing Python, like you are in the top 1% of the Army if your unit is using Python. But what I would just say is once you've got those tools, every one of those tools, you can learn about them on YouTube and on Google and on Instagram. There's tons of information out there that you can use that you can't use with some of the proprietary software that we've contracted in the military. You can learn all these tools literally on your own. And that just takes some little bit of curiosity, I think, really for people. Just have that kind of, hey, what can I do? And I know we'll get to it throughout the conversation. I can give some specifics, but ultimately, like there's a ton of really good, easy ways to take your Instagram feed and make it more than just bad mill memes and actually some educational information.
I feel like we're getting to the point in our lives and our careers where there aren't any really more excuses not to be a computer guy, right? I mean, Microsoft Office is our most prolific weapon system. We touch it more than anything else in the military. And we don't know how to use it, and we're not willing to step into that space and use it. I mean, I think we're really running out of excuses here, especially as the new generation comes up as leaders. Brett, I want to switch to you for a second here. Would you share the story of the Raider Brigade mindset as you were coming in to be Brigade XO and as I was Brigade Commander, and how we wanted to understand more about the formation, and then how using Power BI just opened up a whole world to us that we didn't know was there?
Our formation was coming off of a deployment, and so we were fragmented in terms of information. We had half of almost every battalion overseas at one point, and then the other half is back here at Fort Carson. We're putting this organization together. That's not an unfamiliar story across the Army, but trying to get leaders re-familiarized with what their roles are in garrison versus overseas is vastly different. Reintegrating into regular life and then putting formations back together is a difficult process. But in that sort of environment, it was also conducive for us to basically redo every system that we had because it was already fragmented. So we had this unique opportunity to rethink in a way that a brigade combat team could run and be staffed, and the way information would be passed to and from different organizations. And so as we started thinking about this, as Erik and John have pointed out, this isn't a podcast about how bad PowerPoint is. I think it's a podcast about how uninformed we can be when we use PowerPoint and other systems like that freeze information in time. They almost become like fossils that you can go into an archive and excavate and see, wow, back in 3 months ago, this is what I thought. But it's these frozen pieces of information. And so what we wanted to do was two things. One, we wanted to understand our organization a lot better. But two, we wanted every leader in that organization to have the same understanding, which I know we overuse this term in the military. It's like creating shared understanding. And it's this sort of like blowing cigar smoke over a map pontification. But we wanted to make it a reality. And so the way that we started doing it is asking questions like, can we have companies not build slides for battalion meetings? And can we have battalions not build slides for brigade meetings? Where we would just use centralized data that already exists in systems of record. And even if those were inaccurate, generally systems of record, we could make them more accurate if that's what we knew that we wanted to be drawing our information from. And so can we create meetings where we have a shared truth, shared understanding? The slide doesn't change, the visualizations don't change, but the data inside of them do. The way that it's formatted won't change, but the information inside that slide does. And that led us to a tool that already exists across the Army, and that's Power BI. Erik was talking about it. And so we have all these databases. We have MS Teams. We can communicate a lot faster together. We can have these electronic meetings. We don't have to go see each other face to face. We can screen share. But with the power of Power BI, we were able to start building these centralized databases and then visualizing across the formation. And so you have this, these training meetings that take place and maintenance meetings that take place. And every single time battalion commanders are beckoned to come up to the brigade headquarters, their staffs aren't producing anything for that. They walk into a meeting and leaders can sit down around a table, analyze the data that's changed in front of them, and in a shared group start to really attack the problems and start brainstorming the solutions to fix the problem. And so everybody's kind of seeing everything together in a really useful way. And it's also the same way that the Army sees it because we're using the Army systems of record. And so as you go up the echelons, the problems that divisions and corps are seeing, and they're placing pressure down on divisions and brigades to fix, we're now all seeing the same thing because we're all drawing from that same centralized database. And so the specific examples is some of the questions we were asking is predictive maintenance on the maintenance side. So we use P, S, R, and T. So I guess I should start with the P on the personnel side. How are we gaining the right leaders in the right formations? How are we choosing who should be company commanders in this organization and senior non-commissioned officers in the AIM marketplace? And so we built an entire initiative about trying to choose the right talent. And that's not just gathering data on the individual, like what BCAP and CCAP and the AIM marketplace is allowing us to do, but you also have to see your formation and the data inside that formation to understand if this is a good relationship. Think of eHarmony. That's what you need to do at the P side. R in the readiness side is it's not enough to just take the ACFT and aggregate the data. You're doing things like John just described, and that's doing predictive analytics on gunnery table 3 and how it associates with your final test. Readiness, the same thing, predictive maintenance. You can only break so many striker struts and a month before you start to realize that either we're not putting the struts on correctly, or drivers aren't properly trained, and we need to change a different part of the paradigm. And so you're able with that data to start to neck down where the problem exists isn't necessarily with the maintainers, or it's not with the equipment. Perhaps it's with how we're training this particular set of the driver's training curriculum. And the master driver can fix that in 5 minutes. And then on the training side, I mean, it's the same thing, seeing ourselves in an entirely different way in across time is useful. And I think on the training side, what we started to get to is how can we do these sorts of things that I'm describing, like in Garrison? How can we do them in the field? Can we translate this sort of data literacy and data sharing from the back of a striker so that the formation is seeing itself in real time in a tactical setting? Because I do think another part of this podcast that we need to talk about is what I'm not distinguishing, at least the sort of data literacy and data tools that we're talking about for Garrison. These things need to translate equally to our ability to conduct missions overseas. And so those two things are bifurcated, and they need to be run on the same sorts of systems by the same sorts of leaders.
Well, you hit an important point there, that it's about the tactical versus operational versus garrison leadership. I feel like the Army military really puts a ton of research and development into the tactical edge, right? Getting the best optics and the best targeting for that tactical edge. And if we just took some of that R&D and then applied it to the garrison systems, we would have immense efficiencies, because it's a problem at scale.
I'll give two very specific examples of where Power BI was used in the Raider Brigade as we were attempting to understand this capability and really use data to our advantage. One was in legal processing. So most commanders and staff officers and just regular soldiers don't want the bad folks in our formation to remain in our formation for a long period of time. And so what we did is we took the entire legal team on the whiteboard and said, let's go step by step. What is the process, the nitty gritty detail of the process by which we need to get soldiers out? And that's something that every company commander knows, every first sergeant knows. But when you map out that organizational process, and then you associate time standards to it, and then you build a data set that the legal team tracked, so nobody in the brigade needed to track this. This isn't company command business. This isn't first sergeant business. This was bureaucrats at the brigade staff level that were just entering simple information into an Excel spreadsheet. We created a data visualization that showed down to the company level the time per part of the process to get a soldier out. And what we learned is that some organizations were wildly inefficient and some were wildly efficient. Some people were processing soldiers out of the Army in 9 days or less and doing it the right way. And so what we were able to do is share information across those organizations. And in the aggregate, the brigade started to reduce the amount of time it took the wrong soldiers to be in our formation to get out. And so it's something as simple as that, where it's not as fancy as understanding predictive maintenance. It's not running regressions. It's not solving huge problems, but it's freeing up key leaders' time, because we're now a little bit more efficient in the things that we have to do every single day. The other example I would give is how we did budgets. We visualized the budget. We broke down, this is the brigade budget. This is how much we have to spend per battalion. On average, this is how much we spend, given travel, class 9 parts, class 2 availability. And we created discretionary accounts. And we said, hey, commanders, you have X number of dollars per month to spend on whatever you think you need to spend the money on. Here's your blank check, essentially. And we created a data visualization on it. And so you had a donut chart on Power BI, and any company commander or battalion commander in the formation would access that every single day. And it was a tracking ticker based on our accounts. And the accounting department, our S8, as money was being spent every day, would aggregate that, because it was something that they naturally did in Excel anyway. We took their database and visualized it and said, here's how much money you have, Alpha Company, 4-9 Infantry. And it's amazing, because what you see is first sergeants, senior non-commissioned officers, and company grade officers getting very involved in buying the things that their formations need. And otherwise, they didn't even understand that they had access to that money. And so it's just taking the simple mindsets of like what we already do at home, how we already budget the things at home, how we visualize these things, and putting it into an organizational setting has enormous impact. And so those are just two very salient examples of first steps that we took in the brigade.
I can jump in on that one, like specifically. I was a battalion XO, and when you have one battalion XO who's data literate and the other ones aren't, yeah. I got my battalion an extra, $500,000. I got my group an extra $1.2 million. I remember sitting in a meeting and looking over one of my other XOs, and I looked at his little PowerPoint slide and I went, I'm going to take all your money. And I did. because he couldn't spend it, because he couldn't predict it, because he couldn't keep track of it. And so data literacy will have immediate effects. If I could briefly, we kind of hit on it there, Drew. I thought you really timed it up well with the idea of we have this idea of we have a forward, we have a tactical way of fighting, and then we have a garrison way of fighting. And there is differences, I get that, but there's a lot of permeability there. I mean, the reason we live off of PowerPoint so much in the operations world is because it creeped out of our daily lives. It became our daily tool. And so PowerPoint creeped into 40 PowerPoint slide ConOps when that's not how we should have been doing that. And so your running garrison will have impacts. And so this is where it goes back to, I've used data to find insurgent rocket launchers. I found a way to take data and keep camps alive in Northeast Syria because of calculating range of helicopters differently. So that was huge, but start with your regular meetings. And you had an episode just recently with Major General Leonard where you guys talked, and he brought up like, hey, meetings are a thing we do a lot in the Army. And so it's a great place to set the culture of your organization by saying, hey, this is how we're going to change it. We're going to stop having PowerPoint slides. We're going to stop wasting time making the PowerPoint slides. We're going to actually look at the data. We're going to expect people to come to the meeting and be able to talk, because you can't zoom in on a PowerPoint slide, but you can zoom in on some data and you can find, hey, here's my actual problem I need to solve. I got a bunch of red on here, but some of this red doesn't matter. It's red on PowerPoints on your chase. You're never going to get there. But data, you can filter out. Hey, I don't want to see all that. That stuff doesn't matter to me because those guys are in reset. They should be red. Where's the people who are actually my problems? And then suddenly you like, hey, I've got a real pain point I can fix here. Like you mentioned the struts. So it's an opportunity for us to get sets and reps by transitioning the way we work. And remember that the way you work will permeate into the way you fight.
Yep. John, what are your thoughts?
Yes, sir. Those are fantastic points. Well, I think one additional thing to mention, we talk about in the Raider Brigade about being measuring what matters and being values driven. So the data is connected to our values. So if it matters to us, we should measure it. For example, with Brett talking about legal processing time, if we value good order and discipline, we should measure our legal metrics and use that to inform commander decisions and improve our processes. The same thing with maintenance. We value equipment readiness. So we should measure things like struts break-in, our mechanic manning, and other things that matter to those outcomes. And lastly, soldier well-being. We value the health of the force. We should measure things like soldier profiles, soldier health, and unit culture and climate. So the data is directly connected to our values. It just helps us keep tabs on those things that matter to us and how to improve those outcomes.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. You really should start with the values of the organization and the climate too. I mean, Brett will tell you, having served together, that climate was incredibly important for me. I wanted processes that would point to a positive command climate, one that would make us ready, but also take care of people along the way. And I mean, I'd argue that you can't take care of people unless you know what's going on with the people, honestly. So, as an example, during the SIR discussion, in one calendar year, we had 456 serious incidents. That's DUIs, drug, sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and all of those things. That ends up being leader time, right? 2 out of every 3 days, leaders were responding to some type of serious incident. When you go and you lay that backwards-looking calendar over the course of the last year, and this leader attention that was taken away, and you put the training calendar over top of that, you start to realize that the incidents that are happening are affecting our ability to execute training and affecting the leader's perspective, right? And I would bring in the QTB in the training briefs that we would do with the division. We have this beautiful chart, this PowerPoint slide laid out, and we would say, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this gunnery, and we're going to do this and this. But in the back of my mind, I know that our leaders are going to be taken out of the formation to respond to things that are just keeping the unit running, just stuff that they have to do, right? So when it comes to managing expectations, we got to realize that there are other things that are going on, right? And how do you know until you actually start counting them? So it was a fascinating look. It gave me perspective on the formation I didn't have before. Let's talk for a second about what the individual soldier, the staff officer, the commander, we've got all this data, we've got access to information, we can figure out how to have better insight into the formation. What responsibilities do we have as individuals, as commanders? I mean, back in maybe 20 years ago, you could be the person who chose not to get involved in computer stuff, and that's fine. I've got no more sympathy for the person who just says I'm not a computer guy. And so, but do we actually have a responsibility, because this is a part of our profession and we are going to be more capable and more ready and more, I mean, what do we owe our teammates here? Erik, why don't you add your thoughts to that if you would?
So I was surprised as a lieutenant when I heard people say I'm not a computer guy. I thought that was a little surprising back in like '04, '03. I'm dumbfounded that I hear it today as a colonel. Like I owe a large part of my success because I knew how to sit in front of that little calculator we all sit in front of every day and make it do calculator things because it freed up time. Like I freed up a ton of time. And that's the one thing you will never meet a commander who will say, I got too much time. None of us. So anything you can do to get you more time is gold. And so I had more time in command than my peers. We might have started on the same day and left at the same day, but I had more time in command because I made the computer do the math. And then I got to get out and spend more time with the soldiers to be there for training. I mean, you all know it. Like if you only go out to training once a month, like it's dog and pony. You've got to get out there until you're there and it's Tuesday and nobody cares you're there to really see the training that's happening. And you only get that time if you can find a way to cheat ahead. And I used data and digital literacy was the way I did that. It also gave me time to mentor my subordinates, and they're thirsty for mentorship. And I'm biased, man. You want to keep captains in the Army, right? You want to keep everybody in the Army, but you really want to keep captains in the Army because they will walk away and they will do very well for themselves somewhere else. I had a rule, which is you always have 20 minutes for a captain. Well, are you going to find those 20 minutes? You're going to find it by cheating ahead where you can.
And I think what data analytics can give us evidence to support better decisions. So it's just like answering CCIR. If you know that the enemy has an OP in a certain location, that's going to allow you to form a better tactical plan to be more effective as a unit. And so I think part of the role to your question is that leaders need to provide the demand signal for the insights that data can provide, because that informs better decisions, and then act on it. And then really listen to the feedback loop that data provides. For example, you had mentioned unit culture and climate. I often wonder about how our unit culture, our resilience is. We do the DOX once a year, but really I'd like to know more frequently than that. So we started a Raider culture survey that allows us to diagnose several measurables of our culture, like care for soldiers, leader competence, information flow, every couple months. We just got this survey back, and what I'm seeing is that information flow is a big challenge for us. And this allows me to then target the source of the problems as a commander and hone in on unit training management. So if we're doing better planning at brigade, battalion, company levels, that means that better information gets back to soldiers. This then improves the information that soldiers receive, and that this has positive multiplier effects on our unit culture, climate, and overall unit readiness. And then just to put a bow on to answer your question is it needs to be useful to commanders. So if commanders, it's not just building fancy data models and some kind of something that's academically interesting. It's really, does this day to day make help me make better decisions? Do I know which company troop battery to go talk to because they're at risk of an SIR this week? It's got to be useful. It's got to be insightful.
Yeah. Yeah, Brett, that was one of the brilliant things that I liked about the way that you guys set up the Power BI and the dashboards that we had, is that you made it accessible to the company commanders. I mean, too often higher headquarters like hoards the information and delivers this beautiful, shiny PowerPoint product and said, look what we did. Now you guys figure it out. But the more that the higher headquarters can enable the lower headquarters with these tools, the more effective we'll be top to bottom.
Sure, I appreciate it. I'll be honest though, I knew we had it right not when you started to say like, oh, this is interesting for me at the command level, but after the second or third week of some of these visualizations being the central part of our battle rhythm, it was when the battalion command sergeants major came into my office afterward and said, hey, sir, I was skeptical at first at what you were doing and what this brigade combat team's doing, but this shit is awesome. I've never in my life had a battalion command sergeant major say those words in a sequence that way to me ever. And it was in the course of a week that like three of them came up and said, hey, this is something useful. And when I asked them, like, I'm glad that you like it, but like, why do you like it? What is helpful about it? And they're like, we're no longer coming up to the brigade to defend ourselves. We would put on our armor to come up to the brigade headquarters and defend. And it was always this consternation of like, who had the most data? Did the brigade command sergeant major and brigade commander have things that only the brigade staff knew about, and you walk into a meeting to just get pummeled with it? But now that we have this like true shared understanding, There were meetings where I remember the brigade command sergeant major, having a meeting, and it took maybe 10 minutes to go through the information because everybody had the answers. They just went around the room. Battalion command sergeants major just said, "Hey, that's taken care of. That's taken care of. Yep, totally understood. Talked to that soldier this morning. What are your questions?" And then the brigade command sergeant major just kind of bullshitted with the rest of them for the rest, the period of time, and they got to do leader things, which was really, really awesome. Um, to answer your question that you asked a second ago, is this a responsibility? Is this something that we just shouldn't do, but we must do? I think so. Because, like I said before, I took a hot take at the beginning of the podcast by saying I think your intuition's generally wrong and you're uninformed as an Army leader. Um, the one part that I'll take a little bit of throttle back on that position, though, is that leaders should do things, commanders and sergeants majors should do things that only they can do. Staff officers can do all the rest of the things. Um, One of those things that they can only do is bring that culture and instinct and intuition into the formation. The responsibility, though, when it comes to the data literacy conversation, is asking the questions, asking the right questions, asking deeper questions. And I think a lot of us so far in this episode, we've talked about data as the commodity, but in reality, the number one step to this whole thing is asking the right questions. And so, when you're a commander and you walk to the SSA and you take a picture because there's a bunch of stuff that hasn't been picked up on a Friday afternoon, that's an intuition that something in the organization isn't working properly. And so you send out this large text message and you threaten everybody to go clear out their SSA bins on a Friday afternoon. Everyone does it. Um, there should be questions that come up from that. And so that intuition is important. And that's why I'm throttling back on how I came into the podcast is you as a commander or as a leader have an instinct that's correct. But if you can formulate that instinct into the proper question, then the staff will find the data to support it. And as long as you can stand and say, I don't want to see just a PowerPoint visualization. I don't want to see your answer to this. I want to understand the problem more deeply. Answering this question, I think, is the responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely, Brett. That nails it. And then if there's a commander out there who doesn't know what an SSA is, just turn off this podcast now. Go talk to your S4 and get you squared away. I want to bring up a topic that was a little bit contentious in our command together, and I'll let you explain it. And that's the Raider Hunger Games for company commanders, right? The dashboard we had for company commander performance. Share what we did and your thoughts.
Yep. So this was early on in the stages of just concerning, trying to understand what we could know based on the data sets that we did have. So like everything else, because it fed into the QTB, we built a dashboard that was intended to be communicated to company commanders and first sergeants. And that dashboard was based off of PSR&T, so personnel readiness, sustainment, and training. Just like your QTBs are typically broken up and how the Army kind of understands itself. And so across PSR&T, there are a number of questions and metrics that the Army already has for us. So T is one of those in terms of training. You have marksmanship scores, we have ACFT scores, we have all kinds of things across the maintenance or readiness sector. What's your overdue services look like? What is the total number of days that your whole formation has a fleet that is ready to operate and roll out the gate? What is the timeline it takes for you at the SSA in the sustainment world? How often do you go and get your parts and things like that? So there's all sorts of things when you look at what we already do. We already have these metrics. A lot of times they're held in the battle rhythms inside of them. And so what we did is we went and took all of these different quantifiable things that we ask ourselves as a formation and that we already have to report up to our higher echelons on, and we put it into one dashboard. And then once a month, we would snap a string and say, this is the cut line. We're going to pull from all the systems of record at the brigade level. Company commanders don't have to do a thing. The brigade staff would churn. It would take about 6 hours in total time across an entire brigade formation. So everyone's just working on their little section of it. And we'd update this visualization and it would produce scores. And those scores would say, here you are, company commander, alpha company of whatever battalion. Across all of these PSR&T metrics, there's probably 25 of the top things that you and your higher echelon commanders are concerned with that just give you a sense of where you're at in the Army. How are you doing on the things that you need to do to make this formation run? everything, like I said, from overdue services to legal packets pending. And then we would aggregate those scores, and then we would create an order of merit list across the companies and say, this is the top company, this is the bottom company. And we would also do it in categories as well. But the idea wasn't to say this company commander and first sergeant is the best company commander and first sergeant, and this one is the worst. We would track this OML over time, so you could see it in the calendar, see who's improving, who's not improving. But then we would curate, and I'm going to use that word very particularly. The brigade command sergeant major and I would get together, and we would look at these organizations, and we would focus on one particular thing, one particular metric, sometimes two, and say, let's choose the top company command teams and the bottom company command teams in this particular metric, and let's have them do PT with the brigade command sergeant major and brigade commander. And what we would do is curate these events where we're able to get the top and lowest performers in the brigade to then talk about these sorts of things over breakfast and over PT. And in essence, we're attempting to use data to give lessons learned. And these top company command teams would be like, oh yeah, this is how I do this. Every single day I do this sort of thing, and XYZ, this is the solution. And the bottom company command teams were like, holy crap, I've never thought of that. I don't do that. And you could see over time that the trends are moving upward, not only because you're being quantitatively tracked and you can see the things that you're worried about, but you also understand how your coworkers are doing things on the left and right. And then I think the last thing I'll say about it is when we came up with this idea, the thing that I always thought about and the thing that I wish I had as a company commander is, I'm pretty egocentric, and I think a lot of commanders a lot of leaders in the Army are. There are times where you're as a company commander, you sit back and you're like, psh, I'm killing it. There's no better company commander in the Army. And you sort of lean back in your chair, and then you like turn to the right and you're like, oh shit, yeah, definitely are not tracking the SSA right now. And then you immediately start sending text messages. With that turn to the right, and the thing that you're looking at, in our view, was the radar dashboard. That was that thing that it should just constantly be a dashboard where when you feel like you got it on lock, what do you look at to realize what you're deficient in? And it was data that was fed to you that you don't have to go looking for, and you realize you're not as good as you think you are, which is totally fine, and you're attacking problems instead of trying to figure out what the problem is.
Yeah. I mean, that nailed it. It was enlightening for me to see the companies laid out across PSRT, and I think for the commanders as well, because of those things that you're going to get yelled at when they go out of tolerance at some point, right? Whether it's government travel cards, or whether it's awards or whatever, all of those things. The goal, what we were trying to do, was put those things in a dashboard so you could see where you're at, to define reality better, right? The first job of a leader is to define reality, and let them know where they're at, so that when they approach the threshold, they can nudge it back. But yeah, there were plenty of those moments, man, where we thought everything was on cruise control, and then there's a crisis over here that you had no idea about. But that's all part of it. But hey guys, we're gonna start to wind this down. I want to give you each an opportunity just to kind of share your takeaways, and then give some of the actionable advice to some of the folks who are listening here, either who have never really thought about data in their formation, or are a little bit interested and don't know where to go. I want you to point them in the right direction. And then if you've got some of the work that you're doing, if you want to highlight that or point people to your Substack, Erik, I think that's a great opportunity to do that. And then we'll wrap it up from there. So Brett, I want to start with you, and then John, and then Erik.
It's not about knowing how to code in Python and knowing R and these complex regression, predictive analytics, all that sort of stuff. The conversation, I think, really needs to be about, are we asking the right questions? Are we asking hard questions? And are we continually questioning what we're doing and forcing our formations, particularly the staff, to stop rushing to failure and just slow down and think a little bit more. Like, don't produce the slide that gives the answer. I need you to help me understand the problem. Let's see this problem together, and the formation will get the solution. And so I know it's overly simplistic for a podcast on data, but before you can even understand the data that exists, you got to ask the right questions. And that's the background. I have this great opportunity to be at Cornell now, doing a PhD, which is ridiculous. And what I'm learning, though, is exactly this. The wisdom that I'm gaining and the knowledge that I'm gaining here is by asking these really, really, really interesting and hard questions, and then going and attempting to find the data that suits those things. Sometimes it can be the opposite process. Sometimes you have the data that exists, and so you can look at that data set and ask then, hey, these are the sorts of questions that I can ask of this data, and that's useful too. So I think that's the starting point. Is just, if you ask the really hard questions, I think the really young parts of the formation will find out. And then the other thing is that we haven't mentioned a lot about is the human component of this. Um, I am of the younger generation, and so I pride myself on like this is where I think the Army's going, and I think I am in the beginning phase of the generation, and those that are younger than me are so much better at it already. But the human component is look around your formation and stop seeing people just as that's an infantry platoon leader or that is a logistician or an AG officer, and that's the only thing that they're trained in. A lot of these people that I've learned and worked with and had the advantages of utilizing and standing these processes up is that they came out of West Point and they studied applied mathematics, or they code Python for fun because they never intended to stay in the Army more than 4 years and they're going to try to get an MBA and go do something else afterward. Or they're interested in V-tipping to a functional area, maybe ORSA. And those sorts of humans exist in our formations everywhere. And so their capabilities for you to use data and analyze it and visualize it, it doesn't have to be you that's doing the YouTubing. It's the people who already want to do it of the younger generation that are willing, able, and in most cases already capable of doing it. And so I don't. I would say as advice to my friends and as advice that I had taken starting this journey is look for the right talent first and ask the right questions, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, yeah, well said. That's definitely our most our precious, prized, and valuable asset is our people. And the talents are there in the formation. Yeah, to go out and look for them. That's a great point. John, what are your thoughts?
First, I'll say data cannot replace human judgment. It can only augment the intuition that commanders already have to make better decisions. Use the data we already have, the things we are already measuring, to find the signal in the noise and make better informed decisions to make our operations more efficient and more effective. Second, I want to say this is a generational fight within Army culture. I am benefiting from the foundation that you and Brett laid in the Raider Brigade. I'm proud to say we're still using live dashboards at our command and staff. And so we're moving in the right direction. But the real key challenge and what I'd like to leave listeners with is the knowledge hierarchy. So we're trying to move up from some sheer data to information to knowledge and then ultimately to action. So what it takes is a little bit of data literacy, both on the consumer and the producer side, to both provide the demand signal by commanders to want the evidence to form decisions, and then we've got to train our staffs and resource them to be able to produce that information that can build the insights that are going to enable better decisions. Data gives us a feedback loop to show us how we're doing and to find those relationships that can get us to the outcomes.
It just shows that you have to have the leader's vision for it, right? I mean, if it's not on your priority list and the commander doesn't care about it, it's not going to happen, right? So we either have to have a commander, the leader that does that, or as a staff officer, you've got to show them, sir, man, this is where we think we are. This is where we're really at, and we've literally heard the words, "What am I looking at here?" You're looking at your perception, and then you're looking at reality, and the delta there is risk that we have in the formation. And so I think when you can show commanders where they can overcome risk, that's the time and that's the moment when I think we can get them on board. So Erik, over to you for your final thoughts.
Thanks again, Drew. Thanks for the podcast. It's been great listening to it over the years, and thanks for inviting me on. And John and Brett, I've got a page of notes that I've been writing over here. The stuff you guys have been saying is brilliant, especially getting to see what happens when it's not a single pocket of excellence, but when more and more organizations start linking this in and start doing it, you can see it compounding and really some amazing effects. The expression I've used is it's a bowl full of OODA loops, and it just starts spinning. And so, it's great to see what you guys have done out there with your units. I would say if you think you're going to need data less, you're not paying attention. If you're not looking at Ukraine and seeing what EW is a data fight. Human machine teaming is a data fight. Machine learning, if we're going to incorporate that, they're doing it right now. They're incorporating in targeting. It's targeting your maintenance problems. It's also targeting tanks, and that's a data problem. And so you're going to need more data literacy going forward. I definitely think it's a commander thing. I will stick and die on the whole. A commander needs to be the guy that's going to sit there and he's going to drive his formation forward. And if the commander doesn't care, then it's hard to get a formation on board. If you're looking for ideas, I've got my time, what I did. So go to downrangedata.com, substack.com, or just Google downrange data. There's a bunch of vignettes in there. Brett, you mentioned earlier, one of my favorite ones I got to write was how to make a sergeant major's day better. Because let me tell you, you want to really change a formation, find a way to make a sergeant major's day better, and they will come and they will make everything happen for you. Because sergeant majors love not going to meetings and getting ambushed. And I was able to equip my sergeant major. He showed up to a meeting. He was very frustrated when he went in. He came out happy, and next thing you know, he was an acolyte for us. And he was like, we're going to fix these stuff, because we were able to show him, hey, I'm going to give you real information that you can make decisions off of. So, I would just say, hey, like, thanks again for being fellow people who believe in this mission and believe it. This is the way we're going to fight. We need to be good for it.